Yes. Mr. Nelly, what's next?
I might invite my learned friend, Mr. Sheehan, to call Mr. Godkin.
Commissioner, the next witness is Phillip George Godkin.
Yes.
And does he have his statement?
We actually got a witness, Mr. Sheehan.
He shouldn't be far away, sir. He knows he's on.
Maybe that's why he's not here, Mr. Sheehan.
He's suitably courageous, Commissioner, suitably courageous.
I rather suspect your solicitor should go and find him. Ah, here he is. Mr. Godkin, would you prefer to be sworn or would you wish to make an affirmation?
An affirmation, please.
Yes, affirm the witness, please.
Sure.
I solemnly and sincerely
I solemnly and sincerely
declare and affirm
declare and affirm
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
will be the truth,
will be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Do sit down, please, Mr. Godkin. Yes, Mr. Sheehan.
Thank you, Commissioner. Your full name is Phillip George Godkin,
That's correct.
and your business address is Tower 2, International Towers, Sydney, 200 Barangaroo Avenue, Barangaroo,
Yes, that's right.
in the state of New South Wales.
Yep.
Now, you're attending here to give evidence pursuant to a summons, Mr. Godkin.
Yes, that's right. Yep.
I tender the summons, which is dated the 8th of March 2018.
Exhibit 1.140, summons to Phillip George Godkin. Yes.
And for the purposes of this commission, Mr. Godkin, you've prepared, I think, 2 witness statements, correct?
Yes.
The first, they're both dated the 5th of March 2018. The first, which is the longer, we might call your general witness statement, and it is WBC, forgive me, Commissioner, WBC 90000010001. Do you have any corrections that you wish to make to that statement, Mr. Godkin?
No, I don't.
I tender that, Commissioner, with its exhibits PG 1 to PG 39.
And he affirms its content, does he?
Its contents are true and correct.
Yes, they are.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Yes, exhibit 1.141, statement of Phillip George Godkin, WBC 900001001.
And Mr. Godkin, your second concerns the transaction involving Mrs. Thiruvangam, from whom we just heard. Are its contents true and correct?
Yes, they are.
I tender it, Commissioner, along with its exhibits PG 2, 1 to 26.
Exhibit 1.142, witness statement of Phillip George Godkin, WBC 900002001.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you, Mr. Sheehan. Yes, Mr. Dinelli.
Thank you, Commissioner. Good afternoon, Mr. Godkin.
Hi.
My name is Albert Dinelli and I'm one of the counsel assisting the Royal Commission.
Yep.
You are currently the General Manager, Specialist Finance Business Bank at Westpac?
That's correct, yes.
And you, in that role, are responsible for overseeing most aspects of Westpac Auto Finance business?
Yes, that's right.
And that business provides finance predominantly originated through car dealers?
Correct, yeah.
And that involves finance to customers for the purchase of new cars?
Yes.
And your statements that you've prepared for the Commission, they deal with car loans made by Westpac Auto Finance business through dealer intermediaries only? That's the focus of your...
That is the focus, yes.
You provide, I think, some context about the origination of car loans through dealers in your statement.
Yes.
And you say that the origination of car loans through dealer intermediaries is driven by consumer demand for finance actually at the point of sale. Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
And am I right to say that at the point of sale, the customer approaches the dealer about purchasing a vehicle, really? That is, they go in to buy a car and the discussion about finance occurs in that context?
In that context, yes.
And that's a reason that the deal intermediary manages communications with the customer, even through the loan application process?
Sorry, I'm not sure.
That's a reason the dealer intermediary manages communications with the customer through the loan application?
Yes, that's correct.
That is, there's not someone from Westpac there.
That's correct.
It's dealt with by the dealer.
By the business manager in the dealer, yes.
That's correct.
Yeah.
An example of which, and we won't use his name, but an example of which would be the manager to whom Mr. Avangardam referred. She gave evidence. I don't know if you...
Yes, no. I heard her evidence, and so she referred to the manager, who was the person that she spoke to in dealing with the vehicle, but I think there was also a business manager involved, who was the one that had the conversation with her about the loan. So I think they were two different roles.
Yes, and that the person that she called the manager was the business manager.
Right, okay.
And is it right to say that loans provided by Westpac Auto Finance are currently originated through either St George or Bank of Melbourne?
Yes, that's right.
There was, for a time, you offered, part of Westpac there was another brand through which it was offered as well, is that right?
So we offer the product through what we call white label arrangements with manufacturers, and continue to do that. So some manufacturers, so for example, Holden or Hyundai or Kia, and we use their brand name in the offering of finance, but it's our product.
That's right. So and you are the provider of the finance.
Absolutely.
That is Westpac.
Correct. Yeah.
And you've given evidence, some of which is confidential. I don't want you to disclose that which is confidential, but I can ask you this, and I'd be grateful for you to assist the Commission with an answer to this question. The number of car loans on issue by Westpac by or through dealers in 2017 is a very significant number, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Indeed.
Well into multiple hundreds of thousands.
Yes, that's correct. Yep.
And the quantum of funds that's on loan in respect of car loans by Westpac or through dealers is similarly a very significant number, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
In the multiple billions of dollars?
Yes.
And am I right to say that the overwhelming majority of car loans issued by Westpac are those that are issued, those that are initiated by dealers? Is that right? The overwhelming majority?
Yes, very much the overwhelming majority.
I think that might be your exact language without disclosing the exact number, but you describe it as the overwhelming majority of Westpac Auto Business Finance is done through dealers.
Yes.
Do you feel able to say publicly where the Westpac car finance business sits in the market generally?
Yes, so, and talking specifically about the business of auto finance through dealer intermediaries, then then we are typically number one or number two, so we swap between those two spots. So.
Yeah.
It's fair, isn't it, to say that Westpac as a business is heavily committed to the motor vehicle dealership model and physical point of sale model?
Yes, indeed.
Indeed, it's a very profitable part of the business, isn't it?
It's a profitable part of the business, yes.
Now, you've made a statement you've made two statements, the second of which you were taken was in relation to Miss Thiravangadam. And you're aware, of course, that she made a statement and you were in court in the commission while she gave her evidence?
I wasn't in the room, but I did see her statement, yes. And her evidence, sorry.
And you've read her statement,
yes,
dated
indeed.
the 15th of March?
Yes.
And that was tendered as her evidence, and it was supplemented by what she said. And you accept that she entered into a credit contract with St George on the 26th of July 2012?
Yes, sorry, I don't remember the exact date that she
it's not
signed.
a memory
but-
test, but that
yeah,
is,
yeah.
that you can take it from me, that's the day she signed it.
Yes.
And in the course of preparing your statement, you've reviewed her application and reviewed Westpac's processes in relation to her statement?
Yes, I have.
Her application, I should say. And you identified, did you not, some issues with the application that was made by Ms Thiravangadam?
Yeah, yes, I did.
Can I go to them, if I may? So I'm taking you to your second statement, WBC .900.002.0003. That's for the benefit of the operator. But if I can go to paragraph 17.
Yes.
What page?
0005 and page 5 of the statement. And I'm going to take you through, if I may, what you identified as the issues with that application. The first is, as you say there, that the application showed that her main source of income at the time was a Centrelink carer's allowance, but there was no evidence that the appropriate supporting documentation was obtained to verify the amount. Is that right?
That's correct.
And the only other income that she disclosed in that application was $866.66 per month, which was inconsistent with the payslip that was provided.
That's correct. Yep.
And in any case, that wouldn't have been sufficient on Westpac's processes at the time to approve that loan.
Yes.
Just dealing with the payslip for a moment, I won't take you to it, but the payslip, which for those in the room will have seen we went to in evidence, in Ms Thiravangadam's evidence, was for the 19 March 2012 to 1 April 2012. Why was that a problem for the application?
It was too old.
I see. And
What was the period you would have expected or required?
So there's a requirement that a payslip is not more than, I think it was 90 days old at the time.
90 days was the cut-off.
Yeah.
Thank you.
it's also the case, is it not, that the application stated that Ms Thiravangadam had been employed in her then current part-time role, whereas she was a casual employee?
That was what we gleaned from the payslip, yes.
I mean, her evidence, as you know, and as she said here, was that application was filled out by the manager, the person we've called the manager. When you did your review, You also identified an issue in relation to a debt owed to Orange, the phone company.
That's correct, yes.
And what was the problem with how that was dealt with in the application? I think you find this at 17D, that a document was provided in relation to the debt owed to Orange.
Yes. So,
And was that the problem with that didn't constitute proof of payment? The relevant email?
that's correct.
Now, one other thing is that, and the other thing that's identified by you is that the application had listed no expenses.
That's correct.
And you say that the expenses at the time were benchmarked against what's described as the Henderson Poverty Index. Can you assist the Commission by explaining what that is?
It's a benchmark for living expenses. It's similar to HEM, which I know there's been some conversation about, and we switched from the HPI to HEM at a later time, but it's a similar style of index of expenditure.
In particular, does it depend on, or does it vary according to the number in the household?
I don't know, I'm afraid. It's something that we stopped using some years ago. So we moved to HEM.
HEM is certainly something that does
Yes, it does.
vary according to numbers of dependents, doesn't it? And whether it's a couple or not a couple.
Absolutely, that's right.
These observations you made about the application, can I just understand, were those based on material available to you in the file held by Bank of Melbourne?
Largely, yes. So that and some inquiries.
Largely or wholly?
Sorry, wholly, yes.
Wholly?
Yes.
And were they documents that were held in the file from the time of application, or had some of them been gathered later? What was the position?
All of the documents that I've seen, sorry, I'm just trying to be as accurate as possible. All the documents I've seen have come from that are documents that are held in our origination system.
And therefore were documents available at the time of the grant of the loan?
That's correct, yes.
And the deficiencies that you identify, or the problems you identify, were therefore problems that, to the extent to which they were apparent at the time of origination.
Can I provide an example? So with the Centrelink document, for example, there was no record of that document in the system. That doesn't mean that somebody may or may not have seen it at the time but didn't put it in the system. We've got no evidence.
Well, all sorts of things might have happened, mightn't they, Mr. Godkin? But as far as the origination file was concerned,
This is it.
no Centrelink verification, old pay slips, casual, not part-time, no expenses, and some unresolved problem with the phone company. Is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah, you go on.
So it's your evidence that properly analysed, Mr. Avengadam would have failed the credit processes having regard to proper responsible lending considerations, wouldn't she?
Yes.
It follows that it's Westpac's position now, excuse me just for a moment, I think the document come down. It follows that Westpac's position is that the car loan should never have been granted in the first place.
Yes.
Was any check done at the time of origination?
I'm sorry, I'm not
was any check made at the time of origination about the data or information that was supplied?
It should have been, yes, by
Whom?
the credit acceptance officer who would have been approving the loan.
Yes. And is that a process that at that time would ordinarily have left a documentary record of who did it and what they had done?
Yes.
And did you observe anything on the file? I don't want you to name the officer concerned, but did you observe anything on the file to show that a relevant credit officer had made the assessment and ticked it off?
There were two different credit officers who approved this file over the course of a couple of submissions. But yes, sorry, the answer is yes.
You've referred to a couple of submissions, and that's an area about which I know nothing presently, but go on, Mr. Donnelly.
In relation to the issue raised by the Commissioner, can you go to PG 2-5? It's WBC.104.001.1548.
Yes.
This should be redacted, I think. Shouldn't this, John? Can that just be brought down, please? Perhaps it can be that document can be put up for the Commissioner and for Mr. Godkin.
I have a hard copy.
You've got a hard copy. Does it have the name? It's got the names of the particular people. Can it be, if it could be just put up for the Commissioner but not on the screen?
We're going to have to confront this question of redactions. The redactions process is not working well at the moment. Now, I'm not seeking to assign blame for it. I'm just saying we're not getting it right soon enough. We're scrambling. Mr. Sheehan,
Yes, no, sir, can I say in relation to this document, I answered a question across the bar table from a learned friend wrongly. There's no issue with redaction of this document. The only, in the course of the examination of this witness, there may be a couple of documents where it does arise, and it will only arise because we were given notice last night of some additional documents that were to be put to the witness, so we have an application for rulings that has not yet been determined. But this document won't be a problem, it can go up.
okay, well, let's go back to WBC 104.001.1548.
Before that's put up, and not to cut across my learned friend, but it is a matter of his claim for confidentiality, but this is the whole, one of the reasons why the person to whom Ms Thiruvangadam was on the phone, we didn't disclose the name, is because that person's name appears in this document. But I don't wish to create a mountain of a molehill.
Well, let's not. Yep. Let's put the document up.
This document records, as I understand it, Westpac's internal processes of dealing with the application to which the Commissioner asked questions about which the Commissioner just asked you some questions, Mr. Godkin.
Correct.
And can you assist us by explaining how this process works within Westpac? The process of using this system?
Sorry, the system is quite, like I say, our entire origination system, so there are multiple parts to it.
Okay, well, just the screens that you see up on the screen now and that form part of your statement.
Yes.
There is a heading, memos for application, and then subject approval conditions.
Yes.
Can you assist the Commission by explaining what that process, how that process works? How is it that these matters come to be recorded?
Yep. These will, when an application comes in and a credit officer reviews that application, these note the approval or not, depending on their assessment. And it's here that you might see any conditions of approval, or at least a summary that there are conditions.
And in relation to Ms Theravanga Dam, were there any?
There was a condition of approval which related to the proof that the outstanding telecommunications bill was paid.
I see. And that was one of the issues that you identified as an issue, did you not, with the application process?
That's correct.
Then, can I just understand the document? The condition is in the entry on 2507, is that right?
That's correct.
And then there's another entry at 30 July, approved as submitted. Do I read that as saying the condition is not to be met, has been met? What am I to make of approved as submitted on 30 July? At first blush, I should tell you, I would read it as saying, look, yes, there was a condition, but the condition no longer applies. Go back to the submission as made, and yes, it's okay. Is that what I should read, or should I read something else?
So I would read that and have read that as the condition has been met.
Met. Yes.
So here, and I'm finished with that document for now. So here we see, am I right to say that this is a process where Westpac went through its processes, no responsible lending issues were raised with the application, and it was approved?
That's correct.
And it's reasonable to say that Westpac's processes in relation to Ms Theravanga Dam wholly failed to verify Ms Theravanga Dam's income for the purposes of her application. That's right, isn't it?
On the basis of what we have in front of us, yes.
That is, or is there something else that ought to be in front of us?
No.
That is very significant, isn't it? That the process wholly failed in relation to her application, isn't it? It's also a matter that's of significance legally, isn't it?
Yes.
If I could call up RCD .0001.0001.0001. No doubt, I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. No doubt you're familiar with, very familiar of course, with the National Consumer Credit Protection Act, Mr Godkin?
Yes.
So if I could go to point 0099. Paragraph, I'm not taking you to section 128D, but it provides that that one must, a licensee, that is relevantly Westpac, must do various things that are stipulated in section 130. In section 130, subsection 1, you see that it says for the purposes of paragraph 128D, thank you, the licensee must, before making the assessment, and I'll take you specifically to 1C, take reasonable steps to verify the consumer's financial situation. You see that?
Yes, I do.
And that didn't happen in this case, did it?
No, it didn't.
And the consequence of that failure was that Ms Thiruvangadam got a loan that was unsuitable for her, wasn't it?
Yeah, we shouldn't have made this loan. That's correct.
Well, you'll recall that she had to pay $260 per fortnight and she went into default almost immediately, didn't she?
She was in arrears shortly thereafter, yes.
And if I can take you to another section, just skip ahead to section 133.0104. You are no doubt familiar with this section too, which provides for a prohibition on entering or increasing the credit limit of unsuitable credit contracts. You see that?
Yes.
And under section 133 sub 2, it says that, sorry, I should go back a step. First, Westpac under subsection 1 must not, relevantly Westpac, a licensee must not do various things. That is, enter into a credit contract with a consumer who will be the debtor under the contract, and then skipping to the end of the section, if the contract is unsuitable for the consumer under subsection 2. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
And by reason of subsection 2A, this was a contract which was unsuitable, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
Because it was likely that the consumer, that is Ms Thiruvangadam, will be unable to comply with the consumer's financial obligations under the contract or could only comply with substantial hardship.
Yes.
Now, if I could take you to a document that was prepared at the time that Ms Thiruvangadam's application was reviewed. So you'll recall, of course, that she got her application, she got her loan in 2012. Yep. You've heard her evidence, did her best to pay it. It was in arrears, as you've noted from very early on. And she approached Bank of Melbourne through lawyers towards the end of 2017. You're aware of that?
Yes, indeed.
And then at that time, there was a compliance assessment undertaken, wasn't there?
There was a review, yes.
Yes.
Yep.
I use the language, perhaps not the appropriate language, but the document is headed that way at WBC.300.003.8179. I think it might have, it's an Excel spreadsheet that might have to be opened differently. So this, whilst that's getting up, being brought up, this is what's described as a compliance assessment summary.
Yes.
What is a compliance assessment summary?
So I've only seen this document just in the last couple of days.
Yes.
But this is the assessment of the issue that's been recorded in our incident management system, which is called Juno.
Yes.
By the compliance team.
I see. And can I... without going to the document, but can I say that the column dealing with the compliance assessment states that the root cause of the issue was due to the deficiencies in the credit policy? Did you recall seeing that when you read it?
I do recall seeing that.
And I'm sorry, I'm unable to pull it up for you. We'll come to that document if we can shortly. But you'll recall that it had those words in it, didn't it?
I do recall that.
Now, when
Before you leave that, can you explain to me what those words mean, or to what they refer, deficiency in the credit policy?
When I saw that, which again is just over the last couple of days, I took that to mean the application of the credit policy.
Because on its face, it seems to be assigning as a root cause something much deeper than application, doesn't it?
It does. And
Have you looked into that subject? I understand you've only had your attention drawn to the document in the last couple of days. And yes, there are limits on time, but have you looked into it at all?
into that particular comment with the author, no.
Because on its face, it is a proposition of great width and of possibly no little significance.
Yes.
But as you sit there, at least at the moment, it's not a point that you are able to deal with other than as understanding it as referring to a deficiency in application of credit policy.
That is my understanding, yes.
That's while I've interrupted counsel, can I just return to a matter about this particular application that provoked it? One of the matters you mentioned in paragraph 17 of your statement in item E was no expenses, but that wasn't a problem. Henderson Poverty Index was applied, summarising perhaps too briefly, and your words should be preferred to my summary of them. But can I just explore that with you a moment? Because no expenses were listed, you had no idea what this borrower's expenses were, did you?
That's correct.
You had no idea whether, for example, she was caring for someone in the home or elsewhere who required significant expenditures of money for care.
That's correct.
So is it right to say that the absence of any detail of about expenditure was somehow, again, my word, not yours, cured by resort to the Henderson Poverty Index?
So we have, for the very reasons that you suggest, changed our processes to have both better quality conversation and a better recording of those conversations, so that we would recognise, for example, special circumstances. The practice at the time was less rigorous, and we took the greater of the benchmark that we were using or the declared expenses.
And for what period did that practice exist or persist?
Yeah. Our approach to this issue has continued to evolve over the last some years. I can't give you an exact date, I'm sorry.
Can I then come at it this way and again go to the limits of your knowledge but not beyond the limits of your knowledge? When were changes first made to move away from this?
In around 2015, I'm going
Yes.
to... More substantive changes were made last year.
Last year? Are you able to say when last year?
Significant roll out of responsible lending training to business managers, which talked to some of that training through the early part of the year, some specific system changes which were introduced in August of 2017.
Yes. Including, amongst other things, trying to capture better the expenses that the borrower or proposed borrower may have.
Absolutely. So stepping the business manager, as they're asking their questions, through quite a rigorous process, and including some very specific questions, for example, about special circumstances.
And forgive me for just pressing a little further, as part of that, was there any verification of what the business managers reported in the forms that were ultimately submitted?
Only in, generally no. So there were some circumstances where that might happen, but generally no.
So you were dependent on the accuracy of what the business manager, by that you mean the car yard business manager,
Yes.
do you? You were dependent on the accuracy of what the car yard business manager told the company?
That is mostly correct. So, and
Still the case.
by mostly, I mean in the vast majority of cases.
Yeah. And
Yes, that's correct.
Still the case?
That is correct.
Yes, thank you. One other thing, you said you'd moved away from HPI, Henderson Poverty Index, to HEM, is that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Is it still the case that if reported expenses are less than HEM, the default is HEM?
That is correct.
Yes, I see.
Yeah.
Now, I really will be quiet, Mr. Donnelly, for a nanosecond. Do go on.
Thank you, Commissioner. This is the document, and I apologise, it's taken us a little while to get it, but we have. This was a compliance assessment summary done by G.H. Moon, CCO, Business Bank Compliance. Do you know that person?
Yes, I do.
And he...
She. Sorry.
So she, I'm sorry. Ms Moon did that assessment on the 14th of December 2017. Why would Ms Moon have done that?
So that will have followed the review of the file that followed the specific complaint or representation on behalf of the customer last year, and the inclusion of that file as an incident in our incident management system, Juno. And then Ms Moon would have looked at that to assess the compliance implications.
And she said, and I quoted this to you before, but now you'll see it, the root cause of the issue was due to deficiencies in the credit policy. What I didn't refer to was what's in brackets, that is, rather than mis-selling or error at origination. It seems to me that suggests that the issue of Ms Theravangadam highlights a deficiency in Westpac's credit policy, doesn't it?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I took this to mean the application of the policy rather than the credit policy.
Well,
I think Ms Moon was... So the review at the time found that we didn't do some things that we were supposed to do, and very specifically that relates to the income verification. So in the review of the file, that was found to be the most significant failing in the processing of this application. And so my reading of that comment by Ms Moon is that we didn't apply the standards that we had for ourselves appropriately, and we're taking responsibility. So we didn't think this was mis-selling. We were saying we should have done verification on the income in this case, and we've got no evidence that we did. That's how I...
The mis-selling you exclude is to exclude, no, it's someone else's fault. You were saying this was our fault.
This was ours.
Yeah.
Correct.
In answer to a question before, your evidence was that in relation to Ms Theravanga Dam, you being Westpac was dependent on the accuracy of what the car yard business manager told the company, didn't? To which you said yes, didn't you?
That's correct.
And that still is the position. Your evidence, you answered immediately thereafter when you said, when it was put to you, by mostly I mean in the vast majorities of cases, yes, that's correct, and it is still the case, that is correct. So is your answer, is it your evidence that it's still the case that there is dependence by Westpac on the accuracy of the car yard business manager, what it tells the company?
So if I may, the question was quite specifically in relation to expenses, but yes, the answer is yes.
Mr Godkin, the National Credit Act places obligations on Westpac, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
Now, as you well know, car dealers, and I put this broadly because each car dealer may be different, but generally there is a point of sale exemption, isn't there, in relation to car dealers?
The predominance of the dealers that we work with are via an exemption, that exemption, yes.
But insofar as Westpac is concerned, it itself, as a licensee regulated by the National Credit Act, is required to do those things that are stated that are prescribed by the National Credit Act, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
And in fact, it is its responsibility entirely to do those things, isn't it?
Ultimately, yes.
On the basis, if I could return briefly to the section we dealt with a moment ago, in fairness to you, so that it's before you, it's RCD.002.00. Oh, sorry, before I do, I'm sorry. I might tender that if I may, Commissioner. I'm sorry, Mr. Godkin.
Exhibit 1.143, compliance assessment summary, WBC 300 003 8179.
Thank you, Commissioner. RCD.0022.0001.0001. And if you can go to 0099, please. You'll recall that I took you to this section and said that Westpac must, before making the relevant assessment, and I took you specifically to sub C, but of course you'd be familiar with all of those requirements, make reasonable inquiries about the consumer's requirements and objectives in relation to the credit contract, reasonable inquiries about the consumer's financial situation, and take reasonable steps to verify the consumer's financial situation. The evidence that you've given suggests that Westpac is in breach of section 131C in relation to all of the material that it gets from car dealers, is it not?
So, I can't I'm not qualified to talk about what the legal definition is. The position that we have and the policy that we've got is that we have specific verification standards as it pertains to income. For expenses, we rely on the combination of the application process and the declarations of the customer and the business manager. And similarly, for liabilities, we rely largely on those declarations and any insight that we may glean from a credit bureau report.
I'm not asking for a legal answer. That is a question for someone else.
Yeah.
And a matter upon which, no doubt, Westpac will make submissions too. But your answer was, as a factual matter, in relation to what you do in your job, that you are dependent upon the accuracy of what the car yard business managers tell the company.
So we are absolutely reliant on that, but in concert with the application form, the declaration from the customer. I think the question specifically came to the issue of, do we separately verify expenses? And the substance of my answer is that in the vast majority of cases we do not.
Thank you.
You know, just as a matter of human experience and people signing forms in a car dealership, people signing forms generally, do you have any view on how often people actually read the form they're asked to sign?
I don't, but I'm sure my human experience is much the same as yours, Commissioner. So,
I've been careful not to express my view, Mr. Godkin. Do you think I'm right or wrong to at least wonder how often people read the form they're asked to sign?
if I can answer in a slightly different way, if that's okay.
Yeah.
We have put in place processes that very specifically step the business manager through a line-by-line question as it pertains to expenses, and they can't default to zero. They have to actually enter a number. We have undisclosed minimums in a couple of key expense items, so that if things are too low, like rent and living expenses, it gets referred to a credit officer for some assessment. So that would suggest that we similarly have some concerns that we need to be vigilant.
Sure. And my question was about the customer sitting in the car yard confronted by a blizzard of forms, the last paragraph of which says, in effect, this is a binding contract, and these are statements that are you are telling us are true. My question is, am I right or wrong to wonder whether people read those? And then the associated question is whether I'm right or wrong to wonder whether, even if they do read them, they understand their significance. What do you think?
So my human experience says it's fair to wonder.
Yeah. Yeah. Because it bears on what are reasonable inquiries and reasonable verifications.
I understand.
Yeah.
Can I ask you a few questions about the nature of the car loans that are offered by Westpac, if I may?
Please.
The car finance product that's offered is by way of a fixed rate loan agreement, isn't it?
That's correct.
And the key features of that product, I think you set out in your statement, but I'll also take you, if I may, to PG 116, document ID for which is WBC.104.001.7836. This document, of course, is the Automotive Finance Lending Credit Policy, Consumer and Business of St George.
Yes, it is.
Just for my benefit as I go through these documents, some of the documents that we've referred to as St George and some are Bank of Melbourne, and even Ms Theravangadam had dealings with both. Is there any relevant difference that I need to be aware of?
No difference at all.
Thank you.
Branding.
If one goes to 7850 of that document, there's an overview of the product features, and I see there that the minimum finance amount is $5,000, maximum's $250,000.
Yes.
And this is still in place at the moment. This is the current.
This is the
policy.
current policy, yes.
And the term available is 12 months to 84 months, which I think, if my maths is correct, is 7 years.
That's correct.
And there's various requirements. One is that there's a maximum age of the vehicle of 15 years. I could put that to one side. What is meant by maximum LVR?
So maximum LVR is, so LVR is the value of the loan divided by the assessed value of the vehicle.
The loan valuation ratio.
Yes.
That, and the maximum that's offered is 180%. Is that still the position at Westpac, that that's the maximum?
This is the current policy, so
Thank
yes.
you. And can you explain how that operates in the context of someone walking into a car dealer and buying a $10,000 car?
So the only way that it could operate in the context of somebody walking in and buying a $10,000 car is if they came in with a trade-in which was encumbered by finance, so that there was some significant negative equity
I see.
in the trade-in, so that the loan that we were financing was for the purchase of the vehicle. And then to get that vehicle out of the showroom, we'll quite often take it above 100% anyway if we're funding more. But then, with the addition of the negative equity that was attributed to the previous loan.
Am I right to say that that Westpac will loan more than the value of the car, though? Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
And when Westpac would lend more than the value of the car, one of the things that might be above and beyond the value of the car would be the payment of add-on insurance or an origination fee or any of the other fees that are imposed at the time of purchase. Is that right?
Quite right.
In fact, it's your policy, is it not, that the LVR may include insurances, with the exception of CCI insurance, brokerage and origination fees. All of those can come within the loan valuation ratio. Is that correct?
That's correct.
If that's a convenient
Yes,
time,
of course.
Commissioner.
Mr Godkin, we'll have to ask you to return in time to begin at 2 p.m. Yes, Mr Denali.
Thank you, Commissioner. Mr Godkin, before lunch we were dealing with an overview of the product features of the car loan agreements.
Yes.
And I was asking some questions about LVR, you recall. Is it right that the higher an LVR, the higher the risk from a responsible lending perspective?
No, I don't believe so.
If the LVR is higher, is it not the case that the amount borrowed far exceeds, or at least if it's 180%, it far exceeds the asset which is the subject of the borrowing?
That's correct.
And is that a relevant factor for the purposes of responsible lending?
It might be in some circumstances, but not generally, I would have said.
Okay. If I can take you away from that document to I think it's PG1C22 in your materials, WBC.100.009.4848.
Yes.
What's this? I'm sorry, it hasn't come up yet. What's this document, Mr. Godkin?
This document are the guidelines for the team that does quality assurance
I see.
in our business. So these are the notes that they would use specifically for the purpose of reviewing originated loans for quality assurance.
I see. And on the first page, in fact, the background says that responsible lending obligations set out in the National Credit Act require licensees to conduct unsuitability assessments prior entering into, suggesting or assisting a customer to apply for a credit contract. You see that?
Yes, I do.
And it sets out then a summary of some of the requirements under the National Credit Act.
Yes.
Now, is it the case that if one goes down under the heading of methodology, there is an indication that the following classes are considered higher risk from responsible lending perspective? Can you see that? High loan value ratios,
Yes.
and likewise in terms of the sample selection methodology that's to be used. Immediately below that, there's actually a focus on borrowers with an LVR of over 150%. Do you see that?
That's correct.
So is it the case that an LVR is a relevant consideration in the course of considering responsible lending obligations?
So, and forgive me, but I may be misunderstanding the question, but these factors that you pointed to on this document, this is what we use to identify cohorts of customers for whom there might be a higher risk of responsible lending issues. So typically, a customer who's borrowed a higher LVR might be a little more stressed in their financial circumstances more generally. So that would be a good place to go and have a look to explore whether we've done everything that we need to do. So it's about it actually describes a cohort of customers rather than saying the LVR itself creates the responsible lending issue, if that makes sense.
I see. But as I understand Westpac's policy, it's willing to offer a customer loan for 80% more than the market value of the product that's being sold.
In some circumstances, that's correct.
And just to be clear, I dealt with some of this before lunch, but one reason why it might be, you use the example of a trading that
Correct,
might,
and negative equity.
and negative equity, and that might be one reason.
Mm-hmm.
Another reason might be that it enables the payment of fees above and beyond the value of the car at the time of the purchase of the car.
In combination, it's
With the car.
Yes, always with the car.
So certain fees are always payable, as I understand it, when you enter into a loan with Westpac. An establishment fee,
Yes.
monthly administration fee, there might be some fees charges on early termination. There's an origination fee.
Correct.
So people can go over the LVR, and in fact, in your experience, is it not uncommon for a customer to receive a loan for an amount which is greater than the market value of the car?
That's correct. It's not uncommon.
I see. Now, returning to where we were previously in terms of the PG 116, so this is back in the St George Automotive Finance Lending Credit Policy.
Yes.
WBC.104.001.7836 at 7850. Another issue another feature that's raised is what's described as a residual balloon limit. What's that mean?
So a residual balloon, or what we refer to as balloon payments, would indicate that the borrower has chosen not to pay off 100% of the loan over the initial term. So for example, a borrower might decide to take out a 4-year loan with a 20% residual, which means that there is a 20% balloon payment left over at the end of the 4-year term.
I see. And is that a relevant factor in considering one's responsible lending obligations?
That is, yes.
And if you just go over to the next page, are these various fees, some of which I've already referred to, an accurate description of the various fees that are imposed by Westpac at the time of the purchase of a car?
So specifically the establishment fee, yes. The other two are not, no.
And when you say the other two, the monthly administration fee and the fees on early termination, they're things that arise then during the course of the loan, or may arise during the course of the loan.
That's correct.
Thank you. Now, in your statement, you set out, thank you, I'm done with that document. In your statement, you set out in quite some detail what you describe as the 5 stages of the approval and monitoring of car loans.
Yes.
Now, I'm going to come to those in due course, but I'd like to deal with an issue first, or at least introduce it by introducing another provision of the National Credit Act, again one with which you're familiar, and then to deal with some issues as to the remuneration of car dealers, if I may. Okay. So the first document I'll take you to is RCD.0022.0001.0001. And I'm go to 0060. Now, these are what are described as the general conduct obligations of licensees. Are you familiar with these?
Broadly, yes.
Yeah, in fact, I might come to it in due course, but there's various Westpac policy documents that, of course, include these sort of considerations, these sort of obligations.
Yes.
And you're aware that Westpac must do all things necessary to ensure that the credit activities authorised by the licence are engaged in efficiently, honestly and fairly.
Yes, I am.
And that they have in place adequate arrangements to ensure that clients of the licensee are not disadvantaged by any conflict of interest that may arise wholly or partly in relation to credit activities engaged in by the licensee or its representatives.
Yes, I am.
See that? I'm done with that document for now. Mm-hmm. In your statement, you deal with the question, or what you were asked in preparing your statement, to give an explanation, perhaps I'll get, excuse me, the exact words. To list the incentives and key performance indicators, if any, relevant to Westpac staff or dealer intermediaries by reason of the initiation and approval of car loans. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do.
And can I ask you, without going to Annexure E yet, can I ask you just in broad terms to explain how car dealers come to be remunerated by Westpac?
Sure. So there's three key types of remuneration for car dealers, and in order of significance. The first of those is what we in the industry refers to as flex commissions.
Yes.
So they are commissions which are paid as a percentage of the margin that is achieved over a base rate that we set.
See?
The second of the three are incentives which are typically tied to aggregate volumes over the course of a month. So at the end of the month we would pay a dealer some amount which was based on the amount of business that they wrote over the course of that month.
I see.
And then the third category are fees which are, I'm going to describe as generally flat in nature, i.e. they don't go up or down based on any variable. It's just an amount that we pay them. We might call it a marketing contribution or some other fee, but it's basically flat.
I see. And part of your evidence, you deal with a dealer agreement. The remuneration, does that form part of the dealer agreement or is that separate?
It's typically separate to the agreement, yes.
And the first, perhaps I can take you in a little bit more detail to the first of those forms of remuneration you described as flex commission.
Yes.
Now, as I understand that Westpac sets a base rate for the specific dealer. So if I'm a dealer, you would set a base rate and then the dealer has a discretion to determine the interest rate that is charged by the customer. Is that right?
That is correct.
Yes. And the difference between what's the base rate and what's the customer rate is the margin.
That's correct.
And am I right then to understand that the dealer gets a percentage of that margin, and in fact I won't disclose what the margin is because of its sensitivity, but am I right to say that the Westpac gets a percentage of that margin and the dealer also gets a percentage of that margin?
That's correct, yep.
Do customers ever know that that's something that that is the way that commission structure works?
No.
Certainly Ms. Vangadam would never have known about it, would she?
No customer knows about that structure, I don't think.
And am I right? Do I understand how flex commissions work? That the dealer has an interest in the margin being higher so that he, she or it then gets a higher commission. Is that right?
That's correct.
Now, up until August 2016, there was actually no maximum rate at all, was there, that was imposed by Westpac?
Sorry, I'm just checking the date, but yes, that's correct.
And now there is a maximum rate, or at least since that date there's been a maximum.
That's correct.
So when one walks in, when Ms. Theravangadam walks into the dealership or any other person who ultimately becomes a Westpac customer, the dealer earns more money the higher the interest rate is by virtue of the flex commission. Is that right?
That's correct.
Now, in your statement, you say that in September of last year, ASIC announced that a new legislative instrument had been registered on the Federal Register of Legislative Instruments, such that flex commissions would be prohibited from November 2018. You're obviously aware of that.
Yes, I am.
And I'm not trying to trick you, but you deal with this in Annexure E at paragraph 6.
Yes.
Now, sitting here now, Westpac still allows flex commissions.
That's correct.
And are you aware of what ASIC said about the imposition of flex commissions at the time of announcing that it would be prohibiting them from November of this year?
Yes, I mean, there have been various consultation papers from ASIC, and I'm generally aware of their views on flex commission, yes.
And you referred to, well, you referred to the ASIC announcement. Maybe I'll call that up. It's RCD.0021.0001.0337. And you'll see that this is an announcement on the 7th of September, as you said in your statement.
Yep. Yes.
That ASIC's formally banned flex commissions in the car finance market. And then an explanation of the background. If one goes over to the next page, there's a reference to the lender and dealer share the flex amount. The percentage of flex amount kept by the dealer varies significantly and can be up to 80% of the interest charges. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
And when you indicated that you were familiar with the fact that there had been some reviews of flex commission for some time.
Yes.
And one of the reasons why, or a number of reasons were given by ASIC in its various, in the course of these consultations. Is it right to say that one of the concerns about flex commissions is that the interest rate charged to the consumer is not related to their credit rating or risk of default, but to what they can negotiate with the dealer? Is that right?
That's fair.
Is it right to say that it provides an incentive for sales intermediaries to increase the price of the credit contract?
It can, yes.
And I think you've already said that customers don't know about it. It's not something that's disclosed to them.
That's correct.
Now, if I can move to the next part of...
Why continue it?
Sorry, why continue?
Why continue it?
Something that we've certainly considered. The issue in this market is, in terms of the way that we compete, is that it would be, in our view, impossible to stop it unilaterally without stepping away from the market altogether.
do you predict then that the situation will remain unchanged until the date fixed by ASIC as the date by which the practice must cease?
Yes. Yes, I do.
And no information of any sort about this is given to a consumer. Is that right?
That's correct.
So that the party negotiating the loan, commonly the business manager of the car yard,
Yes.
can act in a way dictated by the interests of that business.
It can, yes.
Regardless of the interests of the consumer.
It's possible, yes.
May that present an issue under the Credit Act about a credit representative having a conflict of that kind and neither revealing it nor preferring the client's interest to the personal interest of the intermediary?
Again, I feel unqualified to give you a legal view.
Unfair question.
Thank
You're
you.
right to call me out on it, Mr. Godkin. Yes.
There's a further amount which I think fits under that heading which you describe in your statement as a percentage amount financed, or a PAF, or PAF. Instead of a flex commission, a small number of dealers are paid a percentage of the amount financed.
That's correct.
Is that as common as flex commissions?
No, it's actually limited to a single mark or brand of dealers, which is tiny in our book.
I see. And if I can just explore this with you, does that raise the same issues?
Exactly the same.
And what about if the third that you have in this is a minimum commission, whereby there's just a minimum amount instead of a flex commission, which is paid when the flex commission is calculated less than the minimum commission?
It's not instead of.
I'm sorry?
Sorry, it's not instead of. So a minimum commission will be a minimum commission, and then there would be flex on top of it.
Oh, yes, I see. I guess your statement says instead of, but
Sorry, yeah.
but I understand the way you,
Yeah.
You explain it. Then there's also incentives based on volume of loans originated. Now, this is, as I understand it, different. This is the second category of remuneration. And a dealer might be paid a VBI, or volume-based incentive, on the total volume of car loans originated by that dealer. Is that right?
That's correct.
And the dealer receives a higher commission for higher volume of car loans.
That's
Is that
correct.
right? And does it matter in relation to that incentive how much the interest rate is?
No, it does not.
Am I right to say that where you have a flex commission, it raises an issue of the type that we referred to before, which is there is a conflict between the position of the dealer in getting as much commission as he can or she can, and the customer, who, unaware of this, ends up paying more than the base rate for their car loan?
There's potentially a conflict, as I've said before, yes.
Is that, if I can take you to just a private screen, WBC.300.021.7233. This
I am familiar with the document, if it helps.
you know the document that I'm referring to. This is a group assurance report. What's a group assurance report, Mr. Godkin?
It's a third line of defence. Think of it as an audit report, but internally, and it might cover operational risk, it might cover credit risk. It's a team within the bank that has a look at our processes and practices with a view to reporting on performance against controls.
Correct, and risks for the
Correct.
company. If you can go to underscore 0003, please. I don't think you've got the document in front of you, but I'll go to the relevant part. And you said you were familiar with this document.
Yep.
One of the issues. I'll just hand a copy to you. Thank you to my learned friend.
Thank you very much.
And I'm at page underscore 0003 or page 4 of 23.
Yes.
And one of the issues identified there as issue 1 with a high rating is this. There are weaknesses in the design of remuneration structures and monitoring of sales practices for dealerships who are originating retail auto finance loans. While prevalent across the auto industry and not unique to the St George auto finance business, current practices significantly increase the risk of unfair consumer outcomes whereby dealer behaviour may be influenced by commission plan design and the ability of a customer to negotiate. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
That's the very concern, isn't it, that we were discussing beforehand?
That is the concern. That is, and that's why we would advocate change. Yep.
And well, when you say you advocate change, your answer before is that it's still a charge that's imposed by Westpac, isn't it?
It's still a pricing structure in the market that Westpac participates in, yes.
And here, there is a reference to, presumably one of your colleagues, and a date, an interim date for scoping of proposed working group plans. Further dates and action plans will then be agreed. None of that work has led to the removal of the weaknesses in the design of the remuneration structures yet, has it?
No, that work specifically has led to the various consultations with ASIC and the work that is now underway to meet the deadline of 1st of November this year.
By which time Westpac will no longer charge flex commissions, obviously.
Again, so Westpac doesn't charge flex commissions, but it's part of the pricing structure. But
Part of the, yes.
Your point is right, yes.
I'm sorry.
No, it's the customer that pays, not Westpac, isn't it? It's an uncharitable point of view, Mr. Godkin.
Sorry, I wasn't suggesting we pay. I was just saying we weren't charging it. The customer, so the commission is built into the price, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, you recognise there's a problem about this.
Absolutely recognise it.
You recognise there's a problem about poor customer outcomes
Yes, absolutely.
and recognised a significant increase in risk of poor customer outcomes.
That's correct.
What have you done in response to the observation that there is a significant increase in the risk of unfair customer outcomes?
So one of those things was to introduce the cap on pricing, which we did.
That's the August 16
Yes,
cap, was
correct.
it?
Yes.
Yes.
The second was to roll out code of conduct and customer fairness training across our business manager network and made that compulsory, and that was in late 2015 and is now part of our accreditation process and our annual training regime, which I refer to in the general statement. But more significantly, and because we believe that the solution to this needs to be an industry solution, we have participated in the work which is being led by ASIC.
But you've referred to three things there. Can I take the first two?
Yeah.
One of the requirements on Westpac under the National Credit Act is to have in place adequate arrangements to ensure that there's no that customers aren't disadvantaged by conflicts of interest. Now, in relation to both the things that you've put forward, the cap still leaves the scope for disadvantage, does it not?
It still leaves the risk
Correct.
there. Yes, correct. I agree.
And if I may say, you do it in considerable detail. You go through the various changes, and we'll come to some of the changes that have been made, and the training that's given to dealers. But let's be frank here, the dealers make more money the higher the interest rate is, don't they?
Acknowledged, yes.
So it's not an adequate arrangement to stop this issue by saying to the dealers, act fairly, act in accordance with good practice, because the higher they charge, the more flex commission they get, don't they?
That's absolutely right, and we haven't suggested that that is the solution. It can't be. There needs to be an industry solution.
I understand.
And
I understand that's your evidence.
Yep.
But in the meantime, has there been any step taken recognising there's a significant increase in risk of unfair customer outcomes? Has there been any step taken to catch or prevent or avoid that risk coming home and there being unfair customer outcomes?
So other than the two steps that I've mentioned, no.
Thank you.
So,
Are you aware of other players that have no longer charged flex commissions?
no, I'm not.
Have you given, has Westpac given consideration to having in place some adequate arrangements to deal with this conflict by removing flex commissions?
Considerable consideration, yes.
Can I move to another issue, please, Mr. Godkin? You
Take this document down now, Mr. Donnelly.
yes.
Are we done with
Thank you.
that? Thank you.
if that could be tendered subject to an application to be made by my learned friend in relation to confidentiality, Commissioner.
Would that be exhibit 1.144, I think? Group assurance report, WBC 300 021 7233. Mr. Sheehan, do you say that there should be some non-publication direction made about it?
So the particular page that the witness was asked about, no.
Right.
As to the balance, just pro tem, we only found out about these documents last night, so the process of this and a number of others, the process of examining them and getting instructions for confidentiality is continuing as we speak. I understand our learned friends are content to have us put on those applications and deal with them in due course.
then if the particular page that we've got is released, no difficulty, am I right?
No difficulty.
And then we can face the other difficulties as and when they're perhaps a little more refined. Is that convenient course?
It is.
Yes, thank you. Yes.
In your evidence, you've of course accepted that Westpac itself has significant responsible lending obligations, that's right?
Yes, I have. Yep.
And one for which you, as the lender, and no one else is liable for your conduct?
Yes.
And if I can put it this way, there's a somewhat of a tension might not be the right word, but the face of the sale of the Westpac loan, the face is actually the manager or the business manager at the dealer. Isn't that right?
That's correct.
And in fact, for Ms. Thiruvangadam, it was the person described as the manager who was the face, effectively, of Westpac. Now, so I don't wish to... I know it wasn't Westpac, but it was the face, the person with whom she dealt.
That's correct.
Now, the fact that that is the position heightens rather than lowers the requirements on Westpac to exercise care to ensure that it satisfies its obligations under the National Credit Act, doesn't it?
Yes, I think that's fair.
And the dealer, if I can take you to the dealer agreement at PG1-1, WBC.300.055.5963. This is the first step, I think, that you describe in your process, in your statement. This is the entry into a dealer agreement between a dealer and Westpac.
That's correct.
And it sets out various of the obligations, rights and obligations of the parties, doesn't it, in relation to that
Yes, it does.
relationship?
Yep.
Not, however, the remuneration. We've dealt with that.
Yes.
Now, under this agreement, if one goes to 0.5966,
Yes.
and where there's a reference to us, that means Westpac. 3.1 says a credit offer must be submitted to us, that is to Westpac, in the form and manner we reasonably require. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
So Westpac can reasonably require its dealers to provide credit offers or submit them in a particular form or manner,
Yes.
and they do that
Yes.
by use of the system. What's that system called again?
Sovereign.
Sovereign, that's right. Sovereign would have been the system that in 2012 too, that the manager sitting in the office, you heard Ms. Thiruvangadam's evidence, that would have been the system that he was typing into, one assumes, at that
That's
at
correct.
that time.
Yes.
Now, this agreement specifies some limited circumstances in which, and I say limited because they're prescribed in clause 11F on page 5969, where you must, it provides that you, being the dealer, must, as our agent, carry out the identification and verification procedures required by law and our AML requirements. Now, AML we can put to one side, that's anti-money laundering, it's not relevant. And the identification verification procedures is the other aspect, And it's those two things that are done by the dealer as an agent, and only those two things. Is that right?
Sorry.
It's those two things and only those two things that are done by the dealer.
I'm sorry, I apologise. Would you mind repeating the two things?
Not at all.
Sorry.
It's those two things that are, and only those two things which are done by the dealer as an agent for Westpac.
Yeah, no, sorry.
He's lost on what the two things are.
Thank you.
Okay, sorry.
Back a square. What are the two things?
What are the two things? Thank you. As our agent carry out, one, the identification verification procedures required by law.
Yep.
Do you see that? It might be
Yes.
easier on the screen, Mr. Godkin.
Yep.
And our AML requirements.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Yes. Yep.
It wasn't a trick question. Then, on 2 pages further along, clause 13.1, no agency, except for any purposes specifically set out in this agreement, you are not our agent for any purpose. You do not have any authority to do anything on our behalf.
Yes.
13.2 says you are under no obligation to obtain or procure credit offers or to do business with us. You acknowledge that if you do obtain any credit offer, then you do so for the convenience of your customers and the expectation that it will assist your business.
Yes.
So this dealer agreement itself makes very clear where a distinction between Westpac and the dealer on the other hand.
Yes.
But I think I'm right to say that Westpac nevertheless requires dealers to do a number of things and undertake a number of functions that that is Westpac, would have to do if it didn't have dealers.
Yes.
Captures information
Correct.
from the customer, puts that information into Sovereign. We'll come to what happens with it, but puts that information. But for the dealer, Westpac would have to do that themselves.
Correct. And importantly, has a conversation with the customer.
Correct. And this document then, when one goes to the schedule at 0.5978, you'll see that you also require, so leaving aside the legal matters that we've just gone to in the dealer agreement, Westpac, require dealers to do a number of things in relation to credit offers.
Yes.
1.1, before submitting a credit offer to us, you must make any inquiries we require you to make to assist us in satisfying our responsible lending obligations. You see that?
Yes.
Each time you submit a credit offer to us, you declare that, amongst other things, you get to D, all information given by you or on your behalf is correct, not misleading, to the best of our knowledge.
Yes.
See that? Clause 2, or this point 2, is headed information and documentation, and it requires you, being the dealer, to submit to Westpac various documents.
Yes.
Do you see that? Now these things, you agree with me that these things are things that are required to be done for responsible lending?
Yes.
And you capture that information, if I can use that language, I think that's your language in your statement, you capture that information by getting the dealers to obtain that information for you.
Yes.
Still in this same document, and you referred to this beforehand at 0.5989, this is what's described as the Code of Conduct and Customer Fairness Outcome Principles. Is this what you were referring to before?
Not specifically. I mean, it is now codified in our dealer agreements, but we we put dealer managers or business managers through specific code of conduct and customer fairness training, which is what I was referring to, which is included in the general statement as one of the attachments, one of the training storyboards.
Yeah, one of those storyboards
Yeah,
that deals with that aspect of the process.
Yes, cool. So it's in addition to this. That's the way I describe it.
And that it provides that the principles below are to be applied to encourage best practice and ensure that customers who are marketed and sold products and services by you that are financed by us receive honest, efficient and measured treatment throughout the sale process. You
Yes.
see that?
Yes.
And then down the bottom, it says, you must comply with responsible lending practices which include, and then 3 things are set out.
Yes.
And broadly, that reflects what's in the National Credit Act.
Indeed.
But it's not actually a requirement generally that dealers comply with the National Credit Act, because generally they're outside it by way of the exemption, the point of sale exemption.
So not by virtue of the Act itself, no.
So when it says you must comply with responsible lending practices, you are saying that that's not a legal obligation on them. You are saying, by this document, we want you to comply with responsible lending obligations.
Well, I'd probably put it slightly stronger. We are saying we require you to comply as part of this agreement.
Under the law, though, the requirement for compliance is on you.
Yes,
Westpac.
and this is not a substitute for our obligations at all.
Thank you. But you rely, I think it's fair to say, rely heavily on the dealers.
Yes, we do. They perform a number of functions.
And in fact, the loan application form used by third-party dealers, that in itself is the primary source for Westpac evidencing whether or not reasonable inquiries have been made, isn't it?
When you say the form, it's the system capture.
The system capture in Sovereign.
But with that amendment, yes, absolutely.
So that suite of documents that we've gone through, there's the legal provisions in the dealer agreement, but then those which we have gone to, Schedule 1 and Schedule 6, require declarations and/or, under the Code of Conduct, a statement, declaration that dealers will do all of these things in the interests of responsible lending, in the interest of Westpac satisfying its responsible lending obligations.
Yeah, and it's customer fairness obligations, yeah.
Now, can I take you to a private screen document, WBC.300.060.2665. Can't put it up on this screen. Do we have a hard copy? Wait be a moment, Mr. Godkin. Now, this is up on my screen, but it's not. But my learned friend is offering me lots of assistance.
Mr. Sheehan, does this document differ from the last one in some respect about whether to keep it?
The same category, Commissioner. Our learned friends have been good enough to indicate to us the pages to which they intend to take the witness. There's no problem with those pages being
So we can
available.
put this page up publicly?
The page can go up.
I-
Assuming that it's the one
To the
we're told
extent
about.
to the extent to which we can, I want to do that.
Of course.
So, yes, so it can
It's
go up publicly.
.2668 can go up. Thank you. So if you just go to you've got the hard copy of the front page. What, just for all of our assistants, what is this document?
Yeah. Sorry, this is sorry, now I've got to find the front page. So this is a second line controls assurance memo. In broad terms, it falls into the same category as the previous document that we referred to, in that it's a type of audit of risk controls and functions.
I see.
Have we got a date on it, Mr Godkin, or at least a year?
A 24th of February 2017.
Thank you.
So I think this is later, a more recent document.
Yes.
It's a document about a year ago.
Yes.
And there, under the heading St George Auto Finance, it says, I understand this to be consistent with what you said before, the loan application form used by third-party dealers is the primary source for evidencing whether reasonable inquiries have been made by a dealer about a customer's financial situation and their requirements and objectives. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
Now, this is at February 2017, so some 4.5 years after the case study that we've been talking about, and there was some testing done, and it indicates that at the time of our testing, being Westpac's testing, for the 10 files reviewed, the loan application forms did not articulate that the loan repayment terms aligned with the customer's requirements and objectives, or whether the dealer obtained details regarding customer monthly living expenses when completing the application. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
That's a matter of grave concern to you, isn't it?
So it's for exactly that reason that we have built some additional requirements into the application capture process that allow us to verify more readily the conversation that's taken place in relationship to the requirements and objectives for a customer.
I see.
I mean, historically, in the main, if I may, historically in the main for this business, there was an acceptance that the requirements and objectives for this purpose were quite simple, in that people walked into a dealer to buy a car, so we understood what they were doing. Our capability has been extended so that we can have quite specific conversations about how they would deal with issues like balloon payments, for example, which we touched on earlier.
So, am I right to say, on the basis of your answer, that at around this time, so this
Yes.
is February 2017,
Yes.
you feared that the processes weren't working?
In fact, that the changes that I've just talked about, which we released in August of last year, so August 2017, were already in, call it manufacturer, at the time that this document was produced. So I can't say specifically when, the business was having the discussions, which, hey, these areas are weak and need tightening up. But by the time this document was written, at least part of the solution was already underway.
And then, and is that a reference to the fact that there was a responsible lending project in place that's commenced in November 2016? Is that what you're getting at?
That's correct. That was part of it, yes.
Can I then, and I think I did take you to the wrong time then for the purposes of answering the question. The question that I want to put to you is October 2016, if I can put you back there,
Yep.
if I may. At that time, you feared that the processes weren't working, didn't you?
So, of course, I wasn't actually in the business, just to be...
Yeah, sorry, I know you're the representative of Westpac.
Yes, indeed. So,
But can I put the question based on the evidence that you've given, your knowledge of of the business.
Through the process of the work that was being done at a group level, in relation to building out a group-wide responsible lending framework, the business became more aware of some of the issues that needed addressing in this business, I think is fair.
Well, Westpac recognised in October 2016 that its responsible lending obligations were lacking, didn't it?
Westpac recognised that it could do more, yes.
When you say that it could do more, as at the time of this testing, it indicates that, and I accept it's a small sample, but of the 10 files that had been reviewed, well, Westpac had been doing nowhere near enough, had it?
Well, he certainly recognised that we were not evidencing what we were doing well enough. So it's always been a requirement for the business manager to have a comprehensive conversation with the customer, and we had relied on the application process as verification of that conversation. What this report clearly demonstrated, and previous pieces of work, was that actually the current capture of the application process wasn't sufficient to evidence that the requirements and objectives conversation had happened.
It wasn't reasonable verification because of the issues that you've identified,
Correct.
was it?
Correct.
Is it right to say then that Westpac considered, in light of what I've taken you to, that it was the dealers upon whom the obligations to do the responsible lending checks, it was on them to do those responsible lending checks?
Not in total, but it was certainly, the business certainly relied on the business managers to have critical parts of the conversations, and particularly around requirements and objectives. So yes, it was on them, and the proof that we had relied on in that conversation had taken place, which was in the application form, we grew to believe was probably not sufficient.
With the benefit of the work that's been done, it was the position that at some point, but certainly in October 2013, it wasn't possible for Westpac to rely on that, on the dealers to sufficiently verify that information, could they?
Well, it wasn't, and I think you meant 16, sorry, but 2016, but it wasn't sufficient for us to rely on the evidence that we'd been relying on, I think is.
The system wasn't showing that it was
Correct.
happening.
Correct, that's exactly right.
You made an agreement with the dealer that certain things would happen,
Yes,
but what you were seeing in the system didn't show that those things were happening.
correct.
One of the ways this Royal Commission is working is to identify particular case studies, but that's shown, isn't it, very obviously in Miss Thea Vangradam's position, isn't it? Because it simply didn't work in that case because the application form bore no resemblance to the material that was actually required.
Sorry, I'm hesitating because there's a couple of different issues here, because there's a requirements and objectives conversation, and I think in that case study, arguably that was kind of reasonably clear, but what we certainly missed in that case study, which we've discussed previously, was some of the verification around some of the financial circumstances.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, is this page going into evidence, is it, Mr Donnelly?
It is.
Exhibit 1.145 will
Thank
be
you.
a page from the second line, Controls Assurance Memo of 24 February 17 at WBC 300 060 2668.
The risk of upsetting the flow, might I request a short comfort stop?
I'm sorry? Oh, yes. Better you pipe up than you don't,
Yeah.
Mr Godkin.
Thank you.
If I come back at, what, 3:10?
Thank you, sir.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, Mr Dinelli.
Thank you, Commissioner. Now, you've given some evidence about the accreditation process, which involves a number of steps, including submitting an accreditation application form.
Yes.
And you exhibit that as PG1 2 WBC.100.009.8344.
Yes.
And I could take you to point 8345.
Yes.
There just seems to be the words have disappeared on the screen. Won't be a moment, Mr. Godkin.
Okay.
Perhaps I can, you've got this document in front of you.
Yes, I do.
Perhaps I can ask you when it was last updated by Westpac. Is it the bottom right-hand corner? Would that be? It was
No, I'm not. I don't know.
the.
I'm not sure if that refers to when we printed out the copy or it was the update.
If you don't know, that's fine. Was this one of the documents that you say has been updated over the course of, or recently, since you've started doing further work in this area?
Well, I know that we introduced the requirement for a police clearance check last year, so...
So that suggests that this is at least a relatively recent version, because this refers to
that.
the National Police Clearance Certificate,
Correct.
doesn't it?
So,
On the second page of that document, you refer to an accredited person and you say, you are acting as the bank's agent when you arrange finance for a customer. Do you see that?
yes, I do.
Is that what Westpac understands that dealers are doing? Acting as their agent for the arranging of the finance?
I don't know the answer to that. So I'm very clear about what their role is, and I'm very clear about the processes and controls that we put in place or need to put in place to manage that role, whether they're acting as agent or not in certain aspects of that. I just don't know, I'm afraid.
This document and the previous documents, including the declarations that I've taken you to, would it be a fair reading to say that Westpac is effectively saying we're subcontracting to you the need to do these things, do them on our behalf?
I think that's. I think that's reasonable. If I can, the way that I think about this is that we have got some documents that basically say to the dealer, you're going to need to do what we need you to do so that we can fulfil our obligations in the way that we need you to do it, and we're going to provide you with training and accreditation processes to get you there.
I see. So if they do their job, Westpac does its job. Is that what you mean?
If we both do our job, then Westpac does its job.
This document also indicates that the accredited person, when they come to sign this, will act as an agent of the bank and not as an agent of the customer. Do you see that? So the third dot point, I'm sorry.
Yes, I do.
Do you see that there's a requirement that, or the accredited person needs to be able to attest to, I will obtain a good understanding of the customer's needs, objective and financial position sufficient to be comfortable the product being financed is suitable for them? Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
Take all reasonable steps to ensure that all applications for finance are true and accurate, completed in full, read and understood by the customer before submission?
Yes.
That might be read as essentially an outsourcing of the obligations to the dealers to do all of those things, isn't it?
It might be read to suggest that, but it's absolutely not the case.
Well, does it come to this, Mr Godkin? You make an agreement which, if it is performed according to its terms,
Yes.
would lead to there being a loan that is made responsibly.
Yes. Yes.
The question then behind that is, yes, you make the contract with the dealer saying you are bound by contract to us to do all these things. Then what is it that Westpac does beyond making the contract that says go and do these things?
So, thank you. And a really important part of making this business work well. So the framework that we have, and parts of it are still maturing, but the framework that we have, which starts with those agreements, but then goes to accreditation and training, so that we make sure that the business managers understand what they are supposed to be doing. We then have what I would describe as guided processes through the system, so that in some elements they are directed very specifically to enter fields or answer questions or ask questions, so that at least in some elements of the application process, we know that they're stepping through those steps, because they can't move forward if they don't step through those steps. And that will include, in some cases that I mentioned before, undisclosed minimums in some expense fields, so that if they put in zero, actually it's going to get referred and somebody's going to ask some questions. So that's a really important second part of the process. The third part of the process is the monitoring that we do across a range of aspects, and I do talk about it in my general witness statement, but it includes calling customers as mystery shoppers post the event. It includes the quality assurance program that we talked to earlier in relation to that document. It includes the hindsighting that we do on credit reviews. It includes some insurance that we do, specifically around some CCI insurance and others. So that's a really important part of the framework. But then finally, none of that works if that doesn't tie into a consequence management framework that takes the feedback from all of that monitoring activity and then feeds it back into the right part of our business, so that we're getting corrective behaviours where that's necessary. And that's part of a framework or program that's been building out over the last 2 years. There are parts of it which are kind of mature, and there are parts of it which are less mature. But that is the kind of the four pillars of making sure that everybody in the business lives up to those agreements.
But you're not there yet,
No,
because parts of it are immature?
That is correct.
what's the comparative importance of the parts that are immature compared with those that are now mature?
So the parts that are immature are some of the so there's a couple of elements of the monitoring, so not all elements, but there are a couple of elements of the monitoring that that need rolling out more broadly. And then more recently we have added an escalation process to the consequence management framework so that, you know, it's really clear that the business managers are getting the right feedback at the right time, or alternatively, you know, in really bad situations, finding something else to do. So I'm not sure that I've answered your question, but I don't. It's hard to.
What I'm trying to get is some sense of whether there are critical elements of the framework which are still immature or not rolled out.
No, I don't think so.
Might have to expand on the answer a bit
Yeah.
beyond that, I think.
Yeah. So we have, for example, the QA or the quality assurance process that we run through, which is already feeding back to the business managers. We are still maturing the consequence management framework. So instead of it being a conversation that is recorded in a call report, there's a bit more teeth to it. So like you have the conversation, but understand that the next conversation will be with the dealer principal rather than the business manager, or, you know, and if we get to 3 conversations, you're probably going to be showing cause about why you should still be a business manager. It's difficult because this thing, like the framework, is powerful as a whole thing.
Yes.
Can I take you to paragraph 37 of your statement?
Certainly.
And you say there that the dealer business managers are specifically required to not merely accept what the customer tells them, but to ask specific questions to ensure that all the necessary detail is captured. You recall I referred to captured before, that's where you used the word captured.
Yes.
You're not, I'm sorry, it's 37, unfortunately. But of course the capture of the information isn't in and of itself sufficient, is it? Just merely capturing the information is not going to discharge your obligations.
No, not at all.
The explanation that you give at is that that stage of the process is still within, if I can put it this way, still at the dealership, isn't it? The obtaining of that information.
Yes, that's correct.
And then the next stage, if I can put it that way, you then jump to step, or the steps that you explain start at paragraph 45, where you say step 1.1, customer selects a car introduced to a dealer business manager. You see that?
Yes.
Again, that's within the dealership.
Correct.
Then 1.2, the dealer business manager will then fill in the customer's application details. You see that? Paragraph 47. The first time that Westpac is involved is what you describe at paragraph 52, and that is once certain information is submitted, information from credit reporting bodies in respect of the customer is obtained automatically, and using that information and the information entered by the dealer, business manager, a credit score is automatically generated for the case. Do you see that?
Yes.
That's the first involvement that that Westpac has in this process.
Correct.
If the case, if it's below a certain threshold, as I understand it, it then goes to a credit team. Is that correct?
There are a number of thresholds, but yes.
Yes. Well, your evidence is here, but tell me if there's something that I've missed. If the credit score is below a certain threshold, or one of a number of thresholds are not satisfied, the case is referred to the credit team for a manual credit review.
That's absolutely correct.
Now, if the case, however, meets the necessary thresholds, the case progresses to the auto finance settlements team.
That's correct.
Now, you describe that in the form of a diagram which might assist. WBC.103.052.8847. You're familiar with this diagram?
Yes.
Now, I think I've worked it out, but you will tell me if I haven't, Mr. Godkin. The customer is represented at the top, and 1.1 is their application for a car loan. And then if we can go down a little bit, we go to the dealer, and we've dealt with the completing of the loan details. If the system approves the person, if the systems approve, moving from 1.2, system approved, it then goes to an assessing of the application. 1.3 is the first time that we're within Westpac, isn't it?
Yes. I mean, we're actually in Westpac in that little box above it, but it's the first time a human touches it in Westpac.
Yes. Sorry, is your point that the yellow is when it says system approved?
Yes.
Yeah, so that's the use of the sovereign system, and if the person's approved, it stays in the dealer. That is to say, it goes then to confirm security and mortgage details, etc., and it stays in the dealer. It only goes into the credit team if the assessment is completed and the answer is no. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Now, just to understand, and I understand it was some time ago, but with the case study that we've been dealing with, the breakdown happened at the very first stage, because it should never have, that application should never have got through the Westpac system right at the first stage, should it?
I'm not sure I follow the automatic process
Yes.
that we have is not about approve or decline. It's about approve or refer.
Correct.
So that loan application was referred at the first hurdle, which was the appropriate response at that point.
But then it was approved by the credit team inappropriately, you concede.
Approved inappropriately. I mean, the initial, yes.
If you go to 55, paragraph 55 of your statement,
Yes.
that deals with circumstances where it's referred for manual credit review.
That's correct.
And that requires checking of various information obtained from credit bodies, customers' asset details, etc.
Yes.
And these are the checks that are done by the credit team, and certain checks that are done include, at paragraph 56, if the customer's declared income is of a certain type, including, for example, where it originates from casual employment, etc., then the credit team will request supporting documentation.
That's correct.
Now, if the thresholds are then met, or the credit team gives the go-ahead, then the dealer business manager can go ahead and provide the documents to the customer, if having gone through that process.
Correct.
However, back when we first went into the Westpac system, if the case meets the necessary thresholds, the case progresses to the auto finance settlements team, doesn't it?
That's correct.
So it doesn't go through any manual check at all if it passes the first stage.
It doesn't go through a manual credit assessment.
Correct.
It does go through a manual compliance check, yes.
Yeah. No, the compliance check doesn't happen till later though, does it? The compliance,
Sorry, yes, you're right, yes.
once
Once it gets to the settlements team, that is the start of the manual compliance check.
yes, but by that time the person's already signed the loan agreement, haven't they?
No, they have not. They have signed an offer.
They've signed the offer and then
So they are making the offer.
I see, and then that is, to use the example of the case study, that is what happened a few days after the 26th of July. You'll recall that
Yes.
the sale was done on the 26th of July and then the documentation arrived, I think, 4 days later, I think.
Yes.
That's the time, during that time, if that process was in place at the time, that's when the compliance check would occur, before that formal document is sent.
Well, certainly before it's accepted, yes.
But what the settlements team does is what you describe at paragraph 66.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's a very different process to that which is done by the manual credit review team, isn't it?
Yes, completely.
In fact, the check is really to ensure that the offer application direct debit requests have been executed. Do you see that?
I do, yes.
That there's sufficient documentation to verify the information entered on the sovereign system.
Yes.
And then the know your customer requirements, and then there's also a check for the add-on insurance policies. We'll return to that issue later.
Sure.
So that, in a case that goes through the automated process, the only things that are done are the checks that I've just referred to in paragraph 66.
There's also an income verification step
Yeah, and
in the settlements team.
in 67, that checks, that's the check of the income
Correct.
at that point.
Yeah.
And that's what you've described as the compliance check, is that right?
Well, it's the combination of that, the ID checks, and the might be the security check at the same time. Yeah.
But at 66B, there's reference to the income check by the settlements team. Sufficient documentation provided to verify information entered into sovereign, including in particular documents evidencing income.
Yes, thank you.
Yes. Nothing about expenses.
Correct.
You'd agree that some positive steps to verify the information provided by the consumer are required?
Sorry?
You'd agree with me that some positive steps to verify the information provided by the consumer is required?
In some cases,
Well, are there cases in which it's unnecessary for any positive steps to be taken by Westpac to verify the information given to you by your consumer?
I think that there are cases where reasonable inquiries wouldn't require more positive steps depending on the nature of the customer, which is not to include income verification. But
Well, you've said that there's no checks of expenses.
that's correct. So, and there is no circumstances where we would not do income verification.
I see. How long has that been the process?
Sorry, which?
The process of checking income, Mr. Godkin?
For as long as I know, broadly.
And in those circumstances where it hasn't occurred, such as the study we've been talking about, you can't offer any explanation for why that occurred?
No, I can't in those circumstances, no.
But can we bring it back to this, Mr. Godkin? Can you point to any stage in the process where expenditure is checked or verified?
So, as I said earlier, in the vast majority of cases, expenditure is not verified.
Therefore, if the dealer business manager records that the borrower is living rent-free with a relative, that just goes through without check.
So the practice at the time of the case study is that would have just gone through without check. I mean, there was a notation on the application saying that it was boarding. The practice today is that would get picked up by an undisclosed minimum built into the system, which would refer it to the credit team with a flag that was what had referred it, which would require them to make further inquiries. Now, those inquiries may or may not rise to the level of some form of verification, but it would at least prompt.
If the dealer does not record, the dealer business manager does not record that the would-be borrower has dependents, there is no part of the system that would pick that up, is there?
There is not. I mean, there's a separate question that we now force the the business manager through, but there's not an independent verification of that other than, again, and it's picked up in the document that we referred to earlier in relation to the quality assurance program, which specifically talks about how people might think about assessing dependence, using that as an example, and if through that monitoring there were issues, then that would be fed back to the credit team.
And if the dealer business manager records that the would-be borrower has no dependents, the HEM that is taken into account in assessing household living expenses is less than the amount that would be taken into account if the number of dependents were truly recorded.
In those circumstances, yes.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with the ASIC regulatory guideline 209?
Yes, I am.
I might call that up. RCD.0021.0001.0088. And Westpac would consider the guidelines represent good practice? Mr. Godkin?
I can't comment on.
I'm sorry?
I can't comment on that. I can't comment on that.
Well,
It is what it is.
It is what it is.
if you go,
ASIC have spoken and that's it.
If you go to 0.0107, page 20 of the document, which will be coming up for you now, paragraph 209.46, you are obliged to take reasonable steps to verify consumers' financial situation. Do you see that?
Yes.
Generally, this will require some positive steps to verify the information provided by the consumer. As discussed earlier, what constitutes taking reasonable steps to verify information is generally scalable, and what amounts to reasonable verification will depend on information and resources that you have access to and the facts and circumstances of each case.
Okay.
There's no distinction drawn there, is there, between income and expenses?
Not specifically, no.
If you go to page 0.0121, paragraph 209.93, having completed reasonable inquiries, you must assess whether the credit contract or consumer lease is not unsuitable, which includes assessing whether the consumer can meet their financial obligations under the contract without substantial hardship. Skipping ahead, this assessment will be based on the information you obtained and verified when you made reasonable inquiries about the consumer's financial situation. It's still your position, or it was your evidence previously, that you rely on the information that the dealers in this regard?
There is a significant portion of the financial circumstances where we rely on the combination of the customer declaration and the business manager declaration. Of course, there are other parts of the financial circumstances where we rely on independent verification, which goes to pay slips, for example.
Isn't a problem for Westpac the fact that its reliance on dealers is such that whatever its contractual arrangements with the dealers themselves aren't subject to the National Credit Act?
That's a factor, but which is why it's so important that the framework that I talked about previously is effective.
Well, in many ways, the obligations on Westpac are greater, aren't they, in those circumstances?
I don't know that they're greater. I think they're more challenging. We have the same responsibilities if we're working with a directly employed distribution force. The reality is we're working with a not employed distribution force, so we need to have extra capability in place to monitor and to create consequence.
It's a not employed distribution force that has an incentive to make the sale and close the deal,
That is also true.
including make the sale of the loan,
That is true.
because they get a commission if they do.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Just returning to that question of remuneration and commission, is it right that the dealer also gets an origination fee?
That is correct, yes.
How much is that at the moment?
I'm going to say it's in the order of $700, I think, but actually I don't know. But it's in...
Ms. Vangadam, I think she paid $500 back in 2012.
That would make sense. And it's probably, it'll be something a bit more expensive than that now, but I don't know the exact number.
one of the things that I didn't deal with when I went to the remuneration, is it true that the dealer also is paid a direct debit bonus?
In some cases.
What does that mean?
So that means, and this is quite an old business, and some things have kind of lasted for a long time, but at a time when direct debit was not so common, the business created a specific incentive for dealers to get customers who they'd originated onto a direct debit payment process.
And how much is that bonus, do you know?
I don't. It's not very much in the scheme of things.
Fear that doesn't convey a great deal to me, Mr. Godkin. If you can give me, I know you don't know the exact numbers, but again, order of magnitude. We're talking hundreds of dollars, or
I don't know.
Don't know, you
I'm
don't
sure.
know.
I'm sure we can provide the data. I'm not trying to,
Yeah.
but I don't know.
no, it's not a memory test, but it's still provided.
It's still, yes, it's still. It's just a legacy.
Why not cut it?
It's a good question. It's because it's tiny and insignificant. It was, included for completeness. But as we go through the process this year towards the implementation of Flex, it will give us the opportunity to tidy up, some very old legacy structures.
I mean, whatever the amount might be, it's another cost to the consumer, isn't it?
Ultimately, the price is that all of the costs added up plus a margin, yeah. So-
Now, in your evidence, you say that Westpac monitors the car loan portfolio through a number of monitoring practices, is that right?
That's correct.
The chief monitoring practices relate to a number of specific areas of concern?
Yes.
What are the main areas of concern for Westpac?
So the chief, like the principal monitoring, has been around interest rate cap monitoring, just to make sure that that's not breached. Add-on insurance monitoring in relation to some specific limits that we've got around add-on insurance. It's become a little bit less relevant because we've systemised some of those limits so that it's a hard stop. The sales practice quality assurance monitoring, which is the document that we've talked to earlier, which will range from potential responsible lending issues to potential add-on insurance issues to potential dealer misconduct issues. I mean, it's quite broad in its scope. Customer call monitoring, which goes directly to questions around whether the dealer business manager is having the right conversation with the customer across a range of different elements of the conversation that we expect them to have. Credit review monitoring, which goes more specifically to what that credit acceptance team does, and a big part of that is their adherence to the credit policy, but it will take into account other elements that are more broad as well. And then we have monitoring over the settlements team who are responsible for that compliance function that we talked to earlier. So it is quite broad ranging.
The first two that you identified, interest rate cap monitoring and add-on insurance monitoring, I think it's fair to say that those are issues that can potentially have detrimental effects on customers. Is that right? The most significant detrimental effects on customers?
In some circumstances, I think that's right.
I think is it of is it a matter of concern to you? Is it a matter of concern to you that, and this is dealing with something I have asked some questions about already, but I want to take you to a particular document. Is it a matter of concern that dealers might be out there encouraging people to purchase at the highest possible interest rate to increase their return, that is their commission at the end of the month?
Yes, of course.
And you deal with this, don't you, in one of the training code of conduct and customer fairness outcome documents? I might take you to PG1C6.
Yes.
WBC.300.001.6570. And if you go to 6577, down the bottom it says general conduct obligations. We've talked about those. They are the section 47 obligations, although you have had put them here for the purposes of discussion with the dealers. And the first dot point is have adequate arrangements in place to ensure our customers are not disadvantaged by any conflict of interest that may arise wholly or partly in relation to the credit activities.
Correct.
And we've talked about that. The example that's given is, for example, this means you should not suggest or recommend a product to a customer purely based on the amount of commission or remuneration that will be received. Do you see that?
Yes.
Does that occur commonly, do you think?
I can't say how commonly that occurs. I think we've acknowledged, and it's been part of our conversation today, that there is a pricing structure in this market which raises potential conflicts, and I've got no doubt from time to time people take advantage of that conflict.
Thank you. Can I ask you now a few questions about add-on insurance?
Please.
What is add-on insurance?
So add-on insurance refers to, in very general terms,
yes.
it refers to insurance which is often sold at a point of sale that will be add-on to it's referred to as add-on because it's add-on to the principal purpose of the transaction, which in this case is purchasing a motor vehicle. In relation to motor vehicle transactions, it typically does not include comprehensive insurance when you talk about add-on. So it might include products like, it does include products like consumer credit insurance,
Tyre and rim,
gap insurance, or some form of shortfall insurance, and in some cases mechanical insurance. Yeah.
Am I right to say that it's a very profitable aspect of the car loans business, add-on insurance?
No, you're not. So for the car loan business, so specifically for our business, it's the most recent numbers is it's 1.5% of the value of loans that we write, and in fact it's because we do have monitoring and compliance and accreditation issues in that part of our business. It's expensive to run.
Perhaps if I could just explore with you what some of the problems are with add-on insurance.
Yes.
Last week, the Commission heard evidence from a Ms. Karen Cox of the Financial Rights Legal Centre. She gave some evidence.
Indeed.
I don't know if you saw that or have read about her evidence.
I did. It feels like a while ago now, but yes.
Yes, it certainly does. Ms. Cox noted that add-on insurance has been highlighted in recent years in a number of inquiries as being a focus of ASIC's attention. She was right to do so, wasn't she?
Yeah, absolutely.
And you'd agree, you'd also agree that that, or you'd be familiar with ASIC's report on add-on insurance last year, a market that is failing consumers, the sale of add-on insurance through car dealers.
Yes, I am.
Ms Cox spoke about some of her experiences where consumers are sold products they don't realise they have and cannot recall consenting to purchasing.
Yes.
Do you have any views on that?
I have a view that that's an inappropriate outcome, yes.
She referred to high-pressure sales tactics that are used. Do you have any personal knowledge of those?
I don't. I understand ASIC's concerns, which I think she was reflecting, but yes.
And references to wearing people down with a long sales process and suggesting that the consumer needs to buy the product? Needs to buy the add-on product as part of the car purchase?
So I'm aware of her testimony and ASIC's similar findings.
Are you able to assist by any experience of that yourself?
So I don't have specific examples that I'm aware of where that's been the case. So no.
Are you familiar that another concern that's been expressed is that unsuitable sales are made where a consumer could never actually claim because of their personal circumstances?
I certainly am, yes.
And that the benefits, even if someone can claim, are very limited?
In some cases, yes, I believe that's the case.
Now, I think I put the question to you before, perhaps in an ill-advised way. When I said that it is very profitable, am I right to say that it is, in your evidence, who is it profitable for anyone add-on insurance?
Historically, it has been an important source of income for dealers. And I can't speak to insurance company profitability, but...
The dealer's got the income, what, in the form of commission?
That's correct.
And commission at what sort of rate or level?
So ASIC has referred to commissions at around 50%, if not higher, going back a few years. Of course, that's changed, but they're still around 20 now.
It's, I think, capped at, is it 20 or
It's not,
25?
I understand it's not actually capped, but the industry has moved to 20 or thereabouts.
Yes. It's been a matter of considerable concern and litigation in the UK in
Yes.
other contexts, hasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
I take you to a document in relation to this issue, if I may.
Mm-hmm.
This is private screen. Again, this is a private screen document, WBC.040.034.6510. Perhaps I can put it to you in...
Is this a document that can be displayed publicly, Mr. Chair?
I'm just checking, Commissioner, forgive me.
Not immediately apparent to me why not, but here we are.
So I agree immediately with your observation. The only thing that is causing some hesitation here is that I don't think we had noticed that this was going to be relied upon, so we haven't checked the rest of it. But
No, but this page
that
is all I'm
page is-
fussed about at the moment. We'll
The page is fine.
slice the onion very thinly, I think, if we may, Mr. Sheehan. So we can display this publicly?
Yes.
Yes.
Sorry to keep you waiting, Mr. Godkin. This document is a memorandum.
Record of the latest regulatory report is not a deep, dark trade secret to Westpac, perhaps.
It's a memorandum
Maybe
to.
it is.
It's a memorandum to the CEO of your organisation. Is that right?
That's correct.
And all I'm taking you to, and I apologise for the delay in getting to this point, but under the heading "the latest regulatory report," there is a discussion of insurance products, and the key findings were these: consumers receive much less in claims than dealers receive in commissions.
Yes.
Is that right in your experience?
I don't have the experience to answer that.
And there's a reference which I would like to deal with you, which is F&I income, which I think is finance and insurance.
correct.
Finance and insurance income is consistently reporting 80 to 120% of dealer profits. What's meant by that?
So dealers, and I should make the point. So when I talk about dealers, my experience is with new car franchise groups. So which doesn't mean they don't do used cars, but it's the dealer customers that we have are in some way associated with a brand franchise that they're selling new cars for. So what I'm about to say relates to that cohort of for dealers. And some broad numbers which are based on some industry work. Some broad numbers based on some industry work which has been conducted by the AADA, which is the, Australian Automotive Dealers Association. So dealers earn about 1.9% of sales as profit. But as a rough guide, on average, more than 100% of that net amount that they make is equivalent to the income that they earn from finance and insurance activities. So in other words, if it weren't for finance and insurance activities, there are a lot of dealers out there who would be losing money.
I gather that's why, and I won't take you to this page, but I'll read it to you.
Mm-hmm.
That's why Mr. Lindbergh, the Chief Executive of Business Bank, went on to say, and we don't need to go to it, but there's a summary that he gives at the end of this memo, and he says, however, it should be noted that the combined effect of finance and insurance changes are likely to substantially erode the profitability of the motor vehicle dealership model and the physical point of sale model that we are heavily committed to.
Yes.
So, add-on insurance, whatever might be its vices, it's a part of the that model to which Mr. Lindbergh was referring. That's an important part of it from the dealer's point of view.
For the dealers, it is has historically been an important part of their profitability. Yes.
And what has Westpac been doing about the issue of add-on insurance to deal with this issue?
Yeah. So, if I might just say that any comments I make in relation to add-on insurance are very focused on the involvement of the auto finance business in funding.
That's what you're here for.
In
Mr.
funding
Godkin.
add-on insurance. So, and so then I might also say that our role in this industry is to fund the requirements that a customer has, and that includes the motor vehicle and any other things that they're financing, and some of those are add-on insurance. So we don't actually sell add-on insurance, but we do finance it.
Clarify that.
That said, we have put some steps in place to mitigate the risk of potential mis-selling in this marketplace, and they include a more comprehensive and robust accreditation process for add-on insurance products which are available for financing, and that will include a review of the PDS with a view to clarity of exclusions, with a view to any potential overlap that may exist between different types of policies, with a view to exploring whether there is any life insurance component, on the basis that we will no longer finance CCI with a life insurance component. And then finally, with a view to any real prospect of benefit. So we would typically see from the insurance company now some estimate of the payout ratio, for example, which is part of that consideration process. We use an external party who's actually an insurance expert, because we are not, to do some assessment for us, and that, combined with some additional information, which would include, for example, commission rates, is considered before we will accredit a product available for financing. Again, we don't sell it, we only finance it. In addition to that, we have capped the aggregate amount of insurance premium that we will fund relative to the level or the value of the vehicle, and we have capped the amount of equity that a customer can have in a vehicle and have gap insurance appropriate. So in other words, if you have too much, and the number is 25%, if you're over 25% equity, it's unlikely the gap insurance would confer a benefit if the vehicle was written off. Does that make sense?
As I understand it, in this, what you're referring to is now part of your credit policy, as I understand it. It's that the total amount financed relating to add-on insurance must not be greater than 25% of the total amount financed. Is that right?
So that's one part of it, yes.
Yes, that was the one you referred to first, I think.
That's correct, yes.
Although 25% can still be quite a considerable amount for customers, can it not?
It could be indeed, yes, depending on the... Yes, it could be.
Can I take you to WBC?
Are we doing something with this page?
Yes, I'm tendering that, Commissioner. Thank
Exhibit
you.
1.146, I think. Page from memorandum to CEO, Westpac Banking Corporation, dated
The 22nd of July 2000. Oh, no, I've got the wrong one. Bear with me. What dates? Just scroll down. Or up, I should say. Um, 22 September 2016.
22nd September 2016, WBC 0400346510.
Commissioner, you'll recall that I referred to the third page, but I understand...
So it's what page number?
I might seek, subject to my learned friend...
Commissioner, the whole document can go in because the part that's confidential is already the essentiality order.
So the exhibit becomes, does it, memorandum to CEO, Westpac Banking Corporation, 22 September 16, WBC 0400346510, and that's exhibit 1.146. Thank you.
Can I take you to a memo to the Board Risk and Compliance Committee, WBC.200.004.2548. Unfortunately, that's 2548. Unfortunately, that's private screen too. But I shall... No. Which one is it? And, sorry, can we go to point 2556, please? Thank you. And I'll hand a copy to you. What date is it, Matthew? So this is a memo to the Board Risk and Compliance Committee, dated, you'll remind me of the date, I'm sorry.
24th of April 2017.
Now, your evidence previously was that there's been a number of changes made in relation to add-on insurance. What was put in this memo to the committee of the board was that ASIC, which is doing some, which has had some concerns about add-on insurance, we responded on 16 February 2017 that Westpac will continue to finance add-on insurance when appropriate, but we have taken a nuanced approach and have stopped financing certain products. What do you mean by a nuanced approach?
Not my document, not my words.
Sorry, what do you... Well, how do you...
If I can say, so ASIC approached Westpac with a very specific request, which is, would you stop financing add-on insurance? Our approach was not a no. It was there are some things that we can do in relation to add-on insurance which we will help. Which we think will help you and the industry mitigate the risk of mis-selling and get better value back in the hands of the customer. And they include some of those things that I talked about earlier.
What's the position with this page, Mr Chair?
That page is on the screen and there's no objection to it.
Yes, should go up then.
But the position, Westpac's position remains that it does continue to finance add-on insurance, but subject to the policies that you referred to previously. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely.
Is there anything else?
Exhibit 1.147 will be a page from the Board Risk and Compliance Committee, 24 April 17, WBC 200-004 at 2556. Mr Danelli, how long do you expect to be with Mr Godkin?
I think Mr Godkin will be happy to hear that I'm just about finished. Can I just have one moment?
No,
Commissioner?
it was a question, not an interrogative
And
statement, despite what you thought. Can we, at least for the moment, reasonably confidently proceed and finish Mr Godkin tonight, or am I trying to go a bridge too far? What do you think, Mr Chairman?
I think we can finish him tonight. If
It would be better if we could finish him, so go on.
Thank you.
Yes.
At the start, you gave some evidence about Ms. Thiruvangadam's experience.
Yes, indeed.
And it appears... is it fair to say that the experience that she had was not an isolated one in the experience of Westpac?
I think it's fair to say that there will be other examples, yes.
There are, you've accepted that there are conflicts between dealers, dealers in their duties, sorry, you've accepted that there is a conflict between what dealers are doing and the consumer when it comes to the particular remuneration of dealers?
So, at the risk of slightly restating, so I've accepted that the remuneration structure in this market is both inappropriate, I think is the word that I used, and creates the risk of conflict, yes.
And it's a risk that, or a conflict that's, that remains in existence to this day.
Yes, it does.
Now, you've given evidence as to some improvements, in particular since November 2016, that have been made at Westpac, but I think it was your evidence that before that there was a recognition that the processes needed improvement.
There was opportunity for improvement, certainly, yes.
But one policy that hasn't been amended over the course of the last 6 years, as I understand it, has been the remuneration policy for dealers, has it?
Absent that cap that we introduced in
Sorry,
2015,
that's right.
you're absolutely correct.
That is between 2012 and 2018. Aside from that cap, the remuneration of dealers has remained the same.
Absolutely.
Anything else? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Godkin.
Mr Dinelli, does any party other than Westpac seek leave to cross-examine Mr Godkin? No, very well. Yes, Mr Sheehan.
Thank you, Commissioner. Mr Godkin, you were asked some questions about payments in respect of direct debit sign-ups.
Yes.
And I'm just going to give you some figures and see if they jog your recollection as to the order of
You're
magnitude.
going to give evidence from the bar table, Mr Sheehan. It's what council is paid to do. Go on.
It'll only be evidence if he agrees, Your Honour. They're tiered according to the percentage of contracts that the dealer is able to get onto a direct debit arrangement.
That sounds familiar.
And the range is from $7.50 per contract up to $20 per contract.
Sadly, that I don't recall,
I
but
recall. We'll have some evidence directed to it, Commissioner, in due course.
Well,
Mr Godkin,
if that's what Westpac says it is, that's what Westpac says it is.
it is what we say it is.
Yes, thank you, Mr Sheehan.
Now, you were asked a little earlier today about ASIC's media release in relation to its Flex Commission's study, and you mentioned that there had been some consultation papers issued. Westpac responded to consultation papers issued by ASIC.
yes, it did.
Can you have a look at this, please? WBC.104.003.2122. If that can be brought up. I'll see if I read it out incorrectly. WBC 104.003.2122. All right, we'll have the document doesn't seem to be on the system. I thought it was. We'll tender it in due course. As it's self-explanatory. But in short, what was Westpac's position in dealing with ASIC as to what should happen to flex commissions in the industry?
Sorry, just so I'm clear, so the position that Westpac shared with ASIC
Yes.
is that we should remove the link between price and commission completely.
Thank you. Now, ASIC's...
Sorry, when you refer to price and commission, you mean?
I mean a complete prohibition of flex commission.
Yes,
complete prohibition.
Yes.
yes.
Now, ASIC's consultations with the industry about this went back a few years before 2016, is that right?
Yes.
All right, and if you have a look at this, I'll see if I can get this one right. WBC.103.001.4629. It's not there? Well, we'll tender that in due course. Now, Mr. Godkin, you said in answer to the Commissioner earlier today that in relation to Mrs. Thiravang loan, that there were two different credit officers who approved it over a couple of submissions.
Yes.
Do you recall giving that evidence? Can the witness be shown Exhibit 1.139, WBC.104.003.7572, at 7573. This was only tendered today, so that will explain why he doesn't have it. Do you have a hard copy?
Minded to call bingo if you get one out, Mr. Shield.
If I get one now, I'll deserve bingo, Commissioner.
Thank you.
The writing on that is very small, Mr. Godkin, but are these, you recognise that these are screenshots from the sovereign system in relation to Mrs. Thiravandrigan.
Yes, I do.
And if you look at the second page, which is 7573, does that enable you to identify who the two officers were involved in the approval of her loan?
Varun Pinto and Lavina Pavira
Right, thank
are
you.
the two officers. I'm sorry, I'm struggling to read that.
And finally, I think, you were asked some questions about the 2017 compliance assessment in relation to her loan. Became Exhibit 1.143, WBC.300.003.8179. And you recall saying that you took the language in that document to mean that there had been failures in the application of the credit policy.
Yes.
All right. Now, have there nevertheless been some changes in the credit policy relevant to the circumstances of the complainant?
Indeed, so specifically in relation to the case study. At the time in 2012, the fact that she was receiving a carer's allowance from Centrelink was available for a credit officer to approve. Today, because it's not on the acceptable income list, it's therefore deemed unacceptable, so you would not approve the loan on that basis. In addition to that...
Just before you leave that, I may well have forgotten this. I thought she was on family benefits rather than a carer's benefit, but perhaps I'm mistaken.
There's a complex series of components to her Centrelink
Yes,
benefits, I think is the answer,
Yeah.
Commissioner.
The second key change, I think, is it relates to the case study, is that a much tighter level of requirements in terms of when a credit officer can approve a credit that has what we refer to as a low side override, which is where the credit score has not met the hurdle in that initial automatic process. And because in this case the customer was not an A-rated existing St George customer or indeed a homeowner, she would not qualify.
So there would be no way of getting her through the current policies?
No, indeed.
When were the changes made to those policies?
Do you mind if I just refer to my statement?
Of course not.
Yeah, so-
Of course you should.
so-
Of course you should.
So I think these are dealt with in paragraph 52 of your second statement, Mr Godkin.
Oh, sorry, you might, so the case study statement. So,
You don't have a date there for the change in paragraph A, but in paragraph B, you refer to a change in August 2016.
yeah, so the second of the things I talked about was August 2016, and I don't specifically know the date. Again, we can provide it. I can search back through the change history and the credit policy to find it eventually, but
No further questions?
Yes,
Commissioner?
thank you, Mr.
Right,
Chairman.
Mr Godkin, be excused.
Yeah, is there anything, Mr. Donnelly?
No.
No. Thank you, Mr. Godkin.
You're
Yes,
welcome.
you're excused further attendance.
thank you.
9:45 tomorrow morning.